What if the true legacy of the crown was not just about duty, but about deep-seated desire? Beneath the grandeur and the centuries of royal pageantry, the British royal family conceals a reality that's anything but polished. Among its illustrious members, some were driven not solely by the weight of tradition, but by all-consuming obsession. Affairs, hushed secrets, and scandals cloaked in elegance. This isn't the sanitized history found in textbooks, but rather the one they wish would fade from memory. Join us as we unfold the tales of 20 royals sharing one common vice, revealing a monarchy working tirelessly to keep the shutters tightly closed. Welcome to the world of 20 British sex addicts within the royal ranks, where the concept of loyalty loses its meaning behind the walls of discretion. Before we embark on this intriguing journey together, ensure you click that subscribe button so you never miss out on those royal revelations that remain unadorned on the family crest. And while you're here, share with us in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is on your end. Are you burning the midnight oil, delving into a world of intrigue, or are you ushering in your day with a splash of royal chaos? Whichever it is, you've chosen the perfect moment to dive in. Let's begin with our first tale, Henry VIII. History paints Henry VIII as the king notorious for his 6 wives, yet that only scratches the surface. His story is not merely one of matrimonial misfortune, but a portrait of a man driven by desperate need and unchecked desire long before he famously severed ties with the Church of England. With a physique that burgeoned like an overripe fruit, he tore through the boundaries of tradition with an appetite that went far beyond the physical. To label him merely a sex addict would be vastly oversimplifying his twisted reality. Henry embodied a far darker reality. He confused his insatiable hunger with a divine right to possess. He wasn't the initial monarch in England to indulge in the company of women, yet he revolutionized courtship into a perilous game. The tales we know, the wives, the beheadings, the declarations, are merely the headline acts. In the shadows linger countless forgotten figures, mistresses silenced or swiftly married off, servants whose slight flirtations were criminalized, women cherished only until they were seen as a burden. Henry's desires were not just scandalous due to their extent, but because they bore the hallmarks of royal approval. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was linked through marriage to his brother, a detail he deftly overlooked until she failed to provide him with a male heir. Enter Anne Boleyn, the cunning and alluring figure who wisely played hard to get, aware that becoming his would bring its own risks. Henry's infatuation wasn't with her alone, but with the hope that she could finally validate his fixation on legacy. The electricity between them was so palpable it reshaped the religious landscape of Europe. For 7 long years, he pined for and, revealing a critical truth about him, his yearning only intensified in denial. But once his pursuit bore fruit, his fervor dwindled as it did for anything else that failed to maintain his interest. Moving on as monarchs often do, he soon turned to Jane Seymour, the Quiet. In this tale of ambition and desire, we meet Anne of Cleves, the queen whose appearance failed to enchant Henry VIII, and Catherine Howard, the youthful beauty who captivated his fleeting affections. Then there was Catherine Parr, his caretaker, as the succession of wives unfolded like a dramatic tapestry, shadowed by the hushed voices of those on the periphery: Margaret Shelton, Elizabeth Blount, Mary Boleyn, sister to Anne. The names may fade into obscurity, but the essence of Henry's desires, entrenched in the very fabric of monarchy, endures. Desire possessed its own throne, a court of intrigue, and a graveyard of dreams. This was no mere indulgence of a king. It bore an icy, calculated demeanor. Henry's approach to love was deliberate, a sharp weapon sculpted from his carnal wants. He wielded affection with lethal precision, where praise was a bounty and disappointment marked one as vile. After years of allure, Anne Boleyn was deemed a seductress, a witch, while young Catherine Howard met her end not for infidelity, but for living vibrantly before their fateful encounter. Courtiers danced through the dangers of flirtation as a trade, their joy and laughter at the sovereign's whims tinged with risk. Each courtly celebration was steeped in the tension of ascendancy or disgrace, with strategy overshadowing sincere affection. At the heart of this relentless cadence was Henry, bloated, paranoid, yet clinging to the sanctity of his desires. Historians have grappled with his nature. Was he a narcissist, a fervent believer, or simply a lonely soul trapped within his own illusions? Perhaps a blend of all three. Yet one truth remains clear. For Henry, sex transcended the mere act. It was a legacy he sought to forge, a means to defy divine and temporal laws. His bedchamber morphed into a political arena, with queens oscillating between pawns, sovereigns, and martyrs. Even in the twilight of his reign, plagued by physical ailments and the deterioration wrought by unrestrained authority, Henry remained ensnared by the illusion of his virility. Clad in armor that limited his mobility, he summoned wives as if they were mere messengers, drawing solace from a facade long past its prime. This insatiable need for desire, one that persisted even when his body could no longer fulfill it, became the most perilous form of addiction. This, perhaps, encapsulates the true terror of Henry VIII, not the beheadings or betrayals, nor the relentless pursuit of a male heir, but the transformation of love into legislation and lust into a decree from the heavens. He carved morality to align with his cravings, punishing those who dared to remind him that kings, too, have boundaries. You might assume that England learned from this legacy. Yet another ruler emerged, one who bypassed the bloody executions while indulging in his whims unabashedly. This was a man who scoffed at restraint, adorning himself with desires like a sumptuous cloak, reveling in pleasure as his identity. They labelled him the Merry Monarch. In truth, he was the original party king. 2. Charles II. If Henry VIII transformed desire into legislation, Charles II evolved it into a vibrant lifestyle. His reign was less about ruling with divine authority and more about captivating with charm. When the monarchy was reinstated in 1660 after a harsh period of Puritan governance under Cromwell, Charles ascended the throne on a singular mission: to restore joy and revelry to England. While critics labelled him as immoral, his allies celebrated his charisma. History remembers him as the Merry Monarch, a title that, while endearing, conceals a deeper truth about a man striving to fill an emptiness through festivity, luxury, and sensuality. Charles II embodied contradictions: a king born in exile, a child of disorder, inheriting a nation scarred by trauma. Once, England had executed one king, shunned pleasure, outlawed theatre, and even made Christmas illegal. Then Charles returned from France, adorned with flowing locks, a foreign accent, and surrounded by poets, dancers, and courtesans, offering not reforms, but a collective sigh of relief from years of moral repression. His love for wit, theatre, and the company of women transcended mere possession. His mistresses were not faceless figures but celebrated personalities like Nell Gwyn, the orange vendor turned actress who gained fame rivaling that of royalty. Barbara Viers, a tempestuous figure, influenced much of his early reign, while Louise Darraway, a clever French beauty, played her cards well. Moll Davis received a pension for a single night spent with the king, highlighting the charisma that defined his court. Yet this wasn't uninhibited indulgence alone. Rather, there was purpose behind the joy. Charles II's charm served as political armor against his adversaries. Surrounding himself with humor and affairs diverted attention from more serious issues: Parliament, war debts, and social unrest. An irreverent monarch was far easier to ridicule than to challenge, and for Charles, laughter was a tool that shielded him from accusations of tyranny. However, Beneath the feasting and flirting lingered a profound melancholy. Observers noted that his quick smile often masked a distant gaze shaped by exile, assassination attempts, and betrayals. For him, seeking pleasure was more than indulgence. It was a refuge from emptiness, and laughter stood as one of the few things that didn't demand loyalty. His affairs extended into the realm of diplomacy. Mistresses were selected for their beauty and political advantage, engaging in a delicate dance of influence. These women commanded respect, winning titles and favors within the king's court, where the lines between personal and political conversation blurred, often determining the fate of the nation over whispered exchanges. Regardless of the court's decadence, Charles's era provided unprecedented visibility to women, unlike anything seen during the Tudor or Stuart reigns. His mistresses were not concealed. They appeared publicly and were immortalized by artists, gossip, and political pamphlets. They wielded a subtle power, one based on beauty and proximity, in a court where desire was not considered sinful but rather an expression of freedom. Ironically, despite its indulgent reputation, Charles's reign was overshadowed by plague, fire, and paranoia. The Great Plague of 1665 devastated London, and the Great Fire of 1666 consumed it. Yet, he returned to oversee relief efforts, a monarch who enjoyed the company of actresses by night and organized disaster response by day. In many ways, Charles II was a living paradox, libertine yet leader, skeptic yet caregiver. Perhaps it was these contrasts that rendered him so compelling. He refrained from feigning purity, openly acknowledging his appetites and leaning into transparency. When questioned by Parliament about his morality, he famously quipped, "I am a great sinner, but I have been forgiven." This was less about seeking redemption and more a form of confessional performance. His humor rendered hypocrisy unnecessary, yet royal pleasure carries its own burden. As his reign waned, the king found himself engulfed by debts, unacknowledged progeny, and shifting allegiances. With no legitimate heir to inherit the throne, he was left with an array of charming illegitimate children, many of whom would carve their names into European history. The name Fitzroy, which means son of the king, proliferated among his descendants, creating a legacy of desire. Reportedly, on his deathbed, Charles spoke tenderly of his beloved mistress Nell Gwyn, urging, "Let not poor Nellie starve," weaving humor into his final act of kindness. This marked his life, an acceptance of his imperfections and an affection for the women who offered solace. Although England mourned, it moved forward, as it always has. His illegitimate offspring forged alliances with noble families, while his sharp wit echoed through satire and his reputation softened into nostalgia. The merry monarch became an emblem of liberation and forgiveness, despite his reign's lack of freedom from repercussions. Ultimately, Charles II's real addiction may not have been to sexual exploits, but to diversion, seeking fleeting comfort in pleasures within a nation that had forgotten to laugh, emotionally solitary despite a crowded bed. As the curtain fell, England recognized that even the most enchanting hedonist cannot evade the repercussions of indulgence. Awaiting in the shadows was another royal, ravenous for pleasure but devoid of charm, a prince whose excess transcended performance into detrimental obsession, who faced life without the veil of humor. He was known as the Prince of Pleasure, and the annals of history would remember him simply as George IV. If you have journeyed this far through the revelries of Charles II's court, then you belong to our circle. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and share your location and the hour, be it midnight gossip or lunchtime intrigue. Now, are you ready to dive into the life of a prince whose indulgences knew no bounds? Let's unravel the tale of George IV. 3. George IV. By the time George IV ascended to the throne, England's awareness was extensive. The portraits had been seen, the whispers circulated, and the scandalous pamphlets devoured. His secret marriage, towering debts, numerous mistresses, lavish dinners, and extravagant diamonds were common knowledge. Even his tailor's bills stretched longer than chapters from the Bible. George wasn't just a figure of royal intrigue. He was an embodiment of public outrage adorned with a crown. His wardrobe, rich with velvet, lace, and regret, painted a contrast to the regal symbol he would come to wear. As the Prince of Wales, he exemplified not a poised future king but a living operetta, driven by insatiable desires. While Charles II radiated exuberance and Henry VIII emanated dynastic urgency, George embodied a unique form of rebellion through indulgence. It was as if he believed that sheer excess could remedy the deep disappointment of his powerless existence. Born in 1762 to a crumbling empire, with a father, George III, battling mental instability and a nation lamenting the loss of its American colonies, he was not destined for temperance. At the age of 21, he succumbed to love for Maria Fitzherbert, a Catholic widow, and secretly wed her, an act deemed illegal under the Royal Marriages Act. Even so, the emotional weight of this union marked his life indelibly. The affair incited parliamentary fury and estrangement from his father, yet it lingered, like a haunting footnote of his moral failings. In the public eye, George revelled in theatrics, turning Brighton into his pleasure palace, the Royal Pavilion, a fantastical realm of domes and minarets, less a symbol of monarchy and more an opulent illusion escaping the drudgery of English propriety. Rejecting the drab moral landscape of his time, he fashioned a palace that mocked the very empire it represented. He gambled voraciously, feasted as if a famine loomed, and drank with an intensity that seemed a vendetta against sobriety itself. His circle comprised artists, dandies, and courtesans, crafting a universe that appeared unburdened by consequence, though his mounting debts were a stark reminder of reality. By 1795, desperate and indebted, he entered into a publicly arranged marriage with Caroline of Brunswick to bolster his finances through Parliament. That union quickly spiraled into a disaster, marked by mutual aversion and isolation. Their lone offspring, Charlotte, became a mere footnote in their troubled history. The increasingly scandalous marriage culminated in George's attempt to divest himself of Caroline following his coronation, leading to a sordid public spectacle where sympathy swayed toward her. Crowned but devoid of love, he wore his coronation jewels like a mask over his shame. Nevertheless, he continued to revel in excess, hosting extravagant banquets with silverware bearing his likeness while paradoxically donning corsets to control a burgeoning waistline. Public appearances were marked with silks and an indignant posture. He seemed more occupied with image than with the substance of kingship. And always, the women encircled him. Some adored him, while others merely tolerated his whims, forming relationships that swung between obsession and obligation. Yet, amidst this parade of pleasure, a void remained unfilled. His desperate quest for beauty often devolved into ennui, leading to tumultuous relationships fraught with control and escapism. Like Henry VIII, he craved devotion. Like Charles II, he sought charm, but curiously, he longed for pity. He perceived himself as a misunderstood romantic, shackled in a bureaucrat's domain, ruling a nation that underestimated his flair. In this spiral of self-pity, his figure became grotesque. By life's end, George IV was a bloated shadow, blind in one eye, relegated to the solitude of Windsor Castle, surrounded only by portraits reminiscent of fleeting loves. The grand figure who once orchestrated revelry now spent his days veiled in darkness, shunning visitors and contemplating death. His legacy, despite its ambitions, amounts to a testament of splendor rather than governance. Though his reign didn't reshape England, it irrevocably altered the aesthetics of royalty and illuminated how low the institution could sink before patience ran dry. His sole legitimate daughter, Charlotte, perished before him, leaving behind no continuation of his dynastic tale, just a king buried under the weight of debts and regret. Yet, amidst his myriad flaws, one undeniable quality defined George: his candid acknowledgement of vanity. He never feigned virtue. He simply pleaded for acceptance, encouraging love in spite of his transgressions. Today, it's challenging to envision England forgiving him. But he certainly managed to avoid a peculiar fate, to design bespoke furniture for his indiscretions. That particular mark of audacity would belong to another sovereign, whose appetite rivaled only his engineering prowess. A man so committed to unrestrained pleasure that he endeavored to upholster it. 4. Edward III, before donning the crown, was known as Albert Edward. To those close to him, he was affectionately dubbed Bertie; to the tabloids, merely a dirty Bertie. In the lush trappings of royalty, he engaged in a perplexing lifestyle, one that included a monogrammed towel collection yet yielded an indifference to Parliament's correspondence. Meanwhile, his mother, Queen Victoria, draped herself in mourning attire for her late husband, while Bertie drowned his own existential sorrow in the lap of luxury at brothels, dinner gatherings, racetracks, and countless beds that were not his own. For nearly 60 long years, he held the title of heir apparent, a span that could drive anyone to a mundane hobby. But instead, Bertie embraced hedonism in all its extravagant forms, reveling in gourmet meals, exquisite cigars, and clandestine affairs. He was the archetype of a celebrity royal, effortlessly drawing attention through his numerous scandals, each one a headline in the newspapers of the day. His silhouette became an emblem for a nation captivated by both admiration and fatigue from his escapades. As Edward ascended to kingship in 1901, he transformed into a well-known yet unspoken truth among society, a man whose public persona radiated affability while privately indulging in excess. At formal events, he donned the mask of an amiable uncle, only to slip away to Paris where the nightlife was richer and the conversation far more stimulating. His affairs, rich with humor and insight, included the luminous actress Lily Langtry, the politically audacious Daisy Greville, and the shrewd Alice Keppel, who became a critical figure in understanding royal affections and public perception. These liaisons were never simply romances. They were strategic tools built to reinforce social connections and present an idealized version of himself, irresistibly charming and adored. Bertie's grand escapades extended beyond romantic interludes. They spilled into his love for culinary arts as he revolutionized fine dining. Feasts transformed into elaborate rituals, with extravagant courses that accompanied carefully selected wines. He was an early adopter of fashion, introducing the tuxedo to the American elite and championing a spirit of indulgence that made being portly a social statement. Unlike the self-pitying George IV or the tyrannical Henry VIII, Edward III recognized his symbolic weight yet exhibited a cavalier attitude towards it. In public life, he blended diplomacy with charm, while in private, he indulged in habits that wavered wildly between predictability and surprising spontaneity. Even in his pursuit of pleasure, whispers of a customized love chair at a Parisian brothel hinted at a conscious engagement with his desires. Whether this item was real or simply folklore mattered less than the influence it had over public perception. Bertie had molded himself into a legend wrapped in lavish excess. Conversely, Queen Victoria viewed her son's life with disdain, perceiving it as a stain upon the British dignity. Accusations of blame weighed heavily upon Bertie, including reflections on the fate of his father and brother. The day Victoria passed, it said he wept, not from grief but from a sense of liberation. At 59, he had awaited the throne for decades, only to stumble into kingship like a disoriented actor who finds the script dramatically altered. Despite all skepticism surrounding him, Edward III proved to be an unexpectedly capable monarch, stabilizing foreign relations, especially with France, while revitalizing the royal image. Even as he grappled with his expanding waistline, he managed to soften the perception of his indulgences, achieving a modest maturity. Yet, the legacy he crafted remained entangled in decadence. It was a world where pleasure was both a personal indulgence and a political tool, where the company of the right woman often bore as much significance as one's spoken words. Underneath it all, the essence of monarchy shifted away from divine right, morphing into a grand performance of effortless charm at any price. Edward VII passed away in 1910, bequeathing a dynasty shrouded in a modern conundrum, a son who regarded pleasure as adverse and a court in need of a refresher on restraint. However, if Edward VII marked the conclusion of an epoch, he was not the only royal to dance throughout history draped in scandal. Long before his time, there existed a queen named Mary, a woman who navigated through 3 marriages while leaving Europe in a mix of reverence and suspicion. She ruled with one hand tightly grasping a crown while the other spun chaos. 5. In the intricate, blood-streaked tapestry of British royalty, Mary, Queen of Scots, emerges as a figure woven with passion and shadow. Born in 1542 and crowned just days later, she was both a regal presence and a figure of scandal. Her very existence ignited obsession. Men followed her into war, exile, and despair, leaving behind a trail marked by poetry, plots, and even lifeless bodies. Centuries later, historians continue to grapple with her legacy, questioning whether she was a reckless romantic or simply a victim of the fantasies birthed by those around her. Perhaps she was both. Such is the complexity of Mary, a woman who embodied duality. At her core, Mary represented a threat, not through an army, although she had that, too, but through her bloodline. A devout Catholic in an era when Protestantism was gaining dominance, she possessed a legitimate claim to the English throne, making her both dangerous to Elizabeth and intriguing to anyone harboring treasonous thoughts. Beyond the political machinations, her persona shone brightly, tall, graceful, eloquent in multiple languages, polished in the arts of the court, and nurtured in France amongst poets and princes. Her very presence was a distraction, one that never faded. Her first marriage, to Francis II of France, was a fleeting endeavour. He was young, frail, and passed away within a year. Mary returned to Scotland, a youthful widow, still regal and captivating, but now utterly alone. Enter Lord Darnley, her cousin, a handsome yet tragically incompetent man. On paper, their union made strategic sense, joining 2 claims to the English throne. But in reality, he was vain, spoiled, and insecure, swinging between jealousy and chaos like a chandelier in a tempest. Despite this, Mary married him, intertwining love with political strategy, or perhaps deceptions on both fronts. Their union fell apart faster than one could fathom. Darker events unfolded with the brutal murder of David Rizzio, Mary's secretary and confidant. In 1566, Darnley and a faction of nobles stormed into Mary's dining quarters, where she sat heavily pregnant, and stabbed Rizzio over 50 times in a frenzy spurred by rumours of an affair, rumours likely unfounded yet eagerly consumed by the court's thirst for drama. Darnley, perhaps grasping that his murderous act was disastrous for marital affection, sought her forgiveness. Publicly, Mary acquiesced. Privately, she distanced herself. Then emerged James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell, rugged, battle-hardened, and exuding the charm of danger. Whether Mary loved him or saw him as a necessary force amid her crumbling reign is uncertain. What is unequivocal is that not long after, Darnley was discovered dead, strangled amidst shattered remnants of a massive explosion that had conveniently spared his life moments earlier. Bothwell was implicated but acquitted, as the trial seemed little more than a charade. Days later, under murky circumstances that possibly involved her consent, he married Mary. The implications were catastrophic. The nobles revolted, and Mary found herself imprisoned. Bothwell fled, only to die raving in a Danish prison. Once again, Mary's life captivated the public's gaze. Was she the mastermind behind her husband's murder? A victim of seduction? A femme fatale or a tragic pawn? England was unsettled, while Scotland showed little concern. From across the border, Elizabeth I perceived a rival needing containment. Seeking refuge, Mary fled to England, only to find herself in a cell. For the next 19 years, she existed in a liminal space, part captive, part threat, a tabloid figure draped in royal finery. Her past romances transformed into political burdens. Every glance at a man was scrutinized, each love affair a potential conspiracy. No longer a queen, she became an idea, dangerous, unruly, romantic, and ultimately expendable. In the end, Elizabeth signed Mary's death warrant, citing treason, but the unspoken reason was far more intricate. Mary was the wrong kind of queen, too passionate, too affectionate, reminding the English court that love could be perilous. In 1587, Mary met her fate on the executioner's block. It was a botched affair, much like her tumultuous life. Yet her legacy endured, not solely due to her tragic end, but because she epitomized a royal existence that was vibrant, messy, and unapologetic. Her stories, real or imagined, morphed into legends. Her letters, whether genuine or falsified, read like venomous sonnets, carrying an allure that defied simplification. Mary, Queen of Scots, was not merely a woman consumed by lust as modern narratives might suggest. Rather, she was a figure who loved deeply, trusted too readily, and ruled in a realm starkly unwelcoming to desire manifested in a gown and crown. Yet, if passion was her downfall, it also contributed to her immortality. She would not be the last queen to succumb to the wrong man at the wrong moment. Decades hence, another royal figure would step into Henry VIII's court, armed with ambition and a seductive charm, dynamically capable of unraveling even the most formidable of kings. Her name was Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard, often overlooked, yet her emergence into the annals of history is akin to a fleeting breeze scented with the sweetest perfume sweeping through the cold confines of a dungeon. As the fifth wife of the infamous Henry VIII, she embodies a whirlwind of youth and allure, but her fate was sealed from the onset, marking her story as a profound reflection on the perils of power, desire, and the dangerous misconception that youth signifies dominion. Born in approximately 1523, Catherine entered the world not as royalty, but as an orphan under the care of her step-grandmother, the Duchess of Norfolk. This household, far from a simple nursery, was a chaotic mix where noble girls were chaperoned in name only. It was a breeding ground for flirtation and a harsh lesson in the currency of beauty, a lesson Catherine learned swiftly. She captivated attention effortlessly, diving into a world that valued appearances above all. By 1539, at just 16 years old, she arrived at court, joining Anne of Cleves's entourage, Henry's fourth wife, a political pawn whose charm fell short in comparison to Catherine's vivacious spirit. Soon, Henry, captivated by the youthful Catherine, discarded and married her in July 1540. The stark age difference between the nearly 50-year-old king and his adolescent bride brought forth an imbalance of power. Henry's yearning for renewal, his past vigor, was momentarily rekindled in Catherine's presence. He labelled her his rose without a thorn, a romanticized yet naive notion against the backdrop of historical reality. However, her ascent to queen did not shield her. It intricately entwined her life with past acquaintances, including Francis de Ham, now circling back into her life, and Thomas Culpeper, who posed a dangerous risk. The nature of these connections remained shrouded in ambiguity. Yet what is unequivocal is the scrutiny that surrounded her, for the court revelled in the impending downfall of a beautiful woman. Murmurs escalated into public spectacle, letters excavated, maids interrogated, turning the royal court into a stage for gossip. When Henry learned of the allegations, his response broke beneath the weight of despair rather than fury. His idealized image of Catherine splintered into shards. Subsequently arrested without trial, she faced relentless questioning. Those who once celebrated her faded into shadows, while the men from her past met grisly fates, executed for their supposed crimes, with Catherine stripped of her dignity and status. On February 13, 1542, her life met a tragic conclusion at the Tower Green, where legend tells of her rehearsing her final moments, urging a swift end. History may not corroborate this, yet the haunting imagery lingers, suggesting that Catherine's true crime was her vulnerability and naive belief in the protective nature of beauty. While some historians cast her as reckless, others frame her as a victim of a society built on exploitation. Both perspectives hold elements of truth. Catherine existed within a framework that equated a woman's worth with her ability to entice, a court encouraging men to chase and women to enthrall, all under a monarchy demanding unattainable perfection before ruthlessly exacting punishment for its inevitable shortcomings. In his quiet grief for her, Henry perhaps recognized in her demise the decay that had begun to envelop his own reign. The echoes of Catherine Howard's poignant yet brief existence resonate throughout English history, not merely as a moral caution but as a haunting inquiry. What fate befalls a girl when her desirability transforms into her undoing? And she was not alone in this tragic fate, for preceding her was the formidable Anne Boleyn, who reshaped the dynamics of allure and authority in Tudor England. Hers was a tumultuous ascent and decline, not merely scandalous, but seismic. Unlike Catherine, Anne was no delicate rose. She was the very thorn itself. 7. Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn's entry into the annals of history was anything but discreet. She arrived like a velvet question mark, fascinating, perplexing, and utterly magnetic. To many, she was heralded as the mother of the English Reformation. To others, she resembled a sorceress who cast her spell upon a king and brought a nation to its knees. Yet, what remains irrefutable is her status as one of the most captivating and mysterious figures to ever wear a crown, one that would ultimately lead to her tragic demise. Before donning the royal garb, Anne instinctively grasped the potency of presence. Though she did not conform to conventional beauty standards of the 16th century, her darker skin, sharp features, and slender frame set her apart. Her sharp intellect, alluring eyes, and voice imbued with sharp wit and confidence captivated all who heard her. Anne's style of interaction was more about engagement than flirtation. She wielded conversation as a form of defense rather than supplication. Born around 1501 into the ambitious Boleyn family, Anne was nurtured in the diverse courts of Europe, first in the Netherlands, then in France, imbibing the sophistication, the burgeoning spirit of religious reform, and the intricate web of courtly intrigue. By the early 1520s, she returned to England, igniting a whirlwind of disruption. Her initial spark caught the eye of Henry Percy, heir to the Earl of Northumberland, but that engagement fell apart under Cardinal Wolsey's influence, likely driven by the intentions of King Henry VIII. Henry's initial interactions with Anne were likely steeped in the usual royal desires. She was clever and elusive, and she staunchly refused to settle as merely another paramour. Entangled with her sister Mary Boleyn, who may have borne him children, Henry was already on a precarious path, and was determined to rise above, to avoid being merely a fleeting mention in history. Thus began a near 7-year pursuit, a profound obsession that distinguished itself from mere infatuation. His correspondence, from desperate to tender, offered titles, jewels, and the promise of future coronations. Anne's responses, cool yet affectionate, hinted at a deeper game, one where desire was intertwined with influence. This intricate dance of power catalyzed one of the most significant political and religious upheavals in European history. In his relentless quest for Anne, Henry defied the Pope, distanced England from the Catholic Church, proclaimed himself as the head of the Church of England, and dissolved his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, all to clandestinely wed Anne. The year 1533 saw her crowned in a lavish ceremony, not merely endorsing her legitimacy but also signaling a destined trajectory. She became the Queen, the woman who inspired a king to append Christendom. For a brief period, and possessed everything: a loving husband, a glimmering crown, and the unwavering gaze of a nation. Yet, her position was fraught with peril. Enemies lurked around every corner: strong Catholics, loyal nobles to Catherine, and court members who resented her defiance and refusal to adhere to expectations of silence and submission. Described as sharp and politically astute, these very traits proved imperative in a treacherous game where survival was far from guaranteed. Expected to bear a son, and instead delivered a daughter, Elizabeth, who would ultimately shape history in her own right, though she was initially seen as a disappointment. Miscarriages followed, and with each passing moment, Henry's affections waned, drawing his gaze toward Jane Seymour, who embodied the gentility that Anne lacked. Disposing of a queen proved risky. A divorce would invite chaos. Instead, court insiders crafted a strategy. In 1536, Anne was arrested, accused of adultery with not one but 5 men, including her own brother George. The accusations were ludicrous and the evidence flimsy at best. Yet by that time, Anne had transformed from a wife into a political liability, an articulate threat that simply couldn't be tolerated. Her trial was a tragic display, more performed than real. Her eloquent defense fell on deaf ears. Convicted and sentenced, Anne met her fate on May 19, 1536, at the Tower of London, clad in a grey damask gown, her composure stark against the backdrop of impending doom. Her final words, graceful and almost lyrical, lauded the king and likely aimed to shield her daughter from fallout. As requested by Anne, the executioner used a sword, a mark of precision over the barbarism of an axe. And Boleyn's death was not a failure to satisfy a king, but rather an outcome of her extraordinary success in ensnaring his interests, steering policies, and evolving beyond what he ever envisioned. Her sexuality was not reckless. It was a finely crafted strategy. Each flirtation a calculated maneuver in a patriarchal world that offered little in terms of weapons for women. Yet, in all her cunning, Anne remained a mortal court within a system that reduced women to trophies, discarding them once they lost their shine. Her legacy, however, did not fade with her execution. It reverberated through her daughter, Elizabeth, who would rise to rule independently, ensuring no man would dictate her destiny. Yet, the perilous game of power and played came at an unforgiving price. Centuries later, another royal would navigate a similarly treacherous path. A prince born into privilege, yet yearning for secrecy. A man whose desires defied the rigid expectations of masculinity and royal decorum. Rather than drafting proclamations, he hid his truths. Instead of seeking acclaim, he sought refuge. His name was Prince George, Duke of Kent. Prince George, Duke of Kent, the rogue royal. In the intricate tapestry of British royalty, Prince George, Duke of Kent, stands as a compelling enigma, a keyhole draped in velvet, beckoning us to peer into a world of hidden truths. Born in 1902 as the 4th son of King George V and Queen Mary, his fate seemed to be one of insignificance. Positioned too far down the line of succession for political relevance, yet too close to the crown to act out openly, one might expect him to fade into the background of royal life. However, George thrived amidst scandal, viewing it as a vital essence, while discretion served merely as a costume he donned at will. Glamour is not a description often applied to the Windsor line, typically associated with a more austere demeanor. Yet, George broke that mold. With impeccably slicked back hair, angular cheekbones that could belong to a Hollywood star, and a wardrobe dripping with continental charm, he appeared as though he had stepped from the silver screen. Fluent in the French language with the grace of a diplomat, he could caress the piano keys like a seasoned lounge performer, often rubbing shoulders with those whose names were never found on official guest lists. He was a master of allure, forever seeking experiences that banished the drudgery accompanying royal existence. In his official capacity, he served the Royal Navy and later the Royal Air Force, but in truth, these duties felt more like breaks in a vibrant cabaret of chaos that he curated around himself. With a catalogue of royal engagements, foreign tours, and medals, he traversed the world in pursuit of thrills that would allow him to escape the lifelessness often associated with royal obligations. Yet there lingered whispers, persistent echoes of a life rich with drama and complexity. George was said to have had relationships with both men and women, not merely casual flirtations, but profound affairs that entangled him with diplomats, actors, and artists. Names like Noel Coward and Jorge Ferrara flitted through the pages of biographies, shadowy figures forever tied to his legacy. The true nature of his sexuality remained obscured, as the palace tended to erase anything it could not neatly categorize. Moving through London's elite, he embraced a life unfettered by consequence, fitting seamlessly into both the salons of dukes and the dressing rooms of stars. It was less rebellion and more an elegant refusal to conform to the mold of the expected royal automaton. A hint of scandal shadowed him. Rumors of drug use persisted, orbiting his persona without solid confirmation. Morphine, barbiturates, and cocaine danced around his name, hinting at a familiar narrative of royals caught in a clash between duty and desire, dulling the discord with whatever substances offered relief. In 1934, George found himself married to Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, a strategic union that provided a momentary veneer of stability to the monarchy. Their wedding was grand, their public appearances graceful, and on the surface, they appeared the perfect pair. Marina, elegant and shrewd, bore him 3 children, while privately enduring the strains of their union with an unyielding grace, favoring dignity over confrontation. He maintained his social whirl, ensnared in his own charisma, perpetually at glamorous gatherings, arriving late, often leaving with someone new. In those days, the press was tightly controlled, leaving the undercurrents unreported. But within the walls of any gathering, it was clear, George did not need to chase scandal. He had become its very essence. His life, however, met not a scandalous end but a tragic one. On August 25, 1942, he perished in a plane crash in Scotland, only 39 years old, while serving in the Royal Air Force under mysterious circumstances that still spark debate among historians. The official account claimed a deviation from the flight path. Speculation swirled about potential clandestine passengers and secret missions, leaving many questions unanswered. His untimely death sent shockwaves through the monarchy, for George was not merely a charming figure, he epitomized modernity, a nonconformist spirit that threatened the very foundations of royal decorum. He lived boldly, with a ferocity that may have surpassed what his upbringing could contain. After his passing, the monarchy's response was swift and self-protective. The tributes were polished and the narrative softened. The rogue prince was reframed as a valiant war hero, while the controversies faded into obscurity. Yet the murmurs persisted, for George, Duke of Kent, was not easily forgotten. His legacy comprises no grand memoirs, diaries, or parting words, only tantalizing tales that are fragmented and unfinished. His life reads like the unproduced script of a film noir, as if he were the protagonist in a narrative the palace wasn't quite ready to release. But where George's saga concluded in a shroud of mystery, another royal emerged decades later, Margaret, whose laughter and rebellion shattered the quietude of royal expectations and embraced chaos unapologetically. Unlike George, she wore her disarray like a fragrant perfume. 9. Princess Margaret was not simply an exception. She ignited a revolution, extinguished her smoke in the remnants, and poured herself another drink. As the spare, not the heir, she enjoyed a rare freedom, one that few royals had the chance to experience, the liberty to misbehave and evade judgment. While her sister, Queen Elizabeth II, embodied duty itself, Margaret was a whimsical counterpart, brilliant, witty, and refreshingly authentic. Born in 1930, Margaret Rose lived in the tension between proximity to the throne and distance from actual power. Though destined never to reign, she was always in the spotlight, surrounded by the gilded restrictions of post-Victorian life, yet growing in the shadowy ruins of empire and the rise of celebrity culture. She was a paradox, part royal, part tabloid sensation, unapologetically herself, defying expectations at every turn. By the time she emerged as an adult, Margaret had already established the traits that would shape her legacy. With a passion for art, music, and grand entrances, she surrounded herself with the vibrant, the intriguing, and those equally rebellious. There was always a drink in hand, a cigarette nearby, and a vibrant social scene that she both epitomized and transcended. Her affair with Group Captain Peter Townsend, a divorced Royal Air Force officer, captivated the public, making her the embodiment of conflict between royal traditions and genuine emotion. However, this romance crumbled under the Church of England's restrictions. Letters passed between them, speculation ran rampant, and ultimately, she stepped away, perhaps breaking her own heart before the institution could do so. After Townsend, her romantic life remained tumultuous. In 1960, she wed Anthony Armstrong Jones, a daring society photographer. They were a striking representation of 1960s evolution, a royal and a commoner, art meeting aristocracy. Their wedding made history as the first royal nuptials broadcast on television, providing a glimpse of what could have been, a modern fairy tale. Yet their marriage fell into decline, burdened by unfulfilled expectations, infidelities, and their mutual desire for independence. Living at Kensington Palace but reveling in wild gatherings on the island of Mystique, Margaret became a visible symbol of the era, indulging in drink, laughter, and flirtation with the likes of rock stars and politics. Critics labeled her as spoiled, selfish, and arrogant, a perception not entirely unfounded. Beneath her sharp wit, however, was a profound loneliness in a family that prioritized silence over authenticity. Margaret wasn't merely rebellious. She was also a player in the script written by a system that dictated her every move. In a world where her deviations were public spectacles, she had discreet liaisons and daring romances that made headlines, especially her relationship with Rhodey Llewellyn, a younger man who personified the freedom she craved. Their images, she in swimwear, he in denim, became evocative symbols of what the monarchy feared. Yet, amid the glitz and glamour, there lay an ongoing inner performance, a solitary act of yearning for an alternative life. With charm and keen awareness of her public persona, she sometimes embraced the narrative that surrounded her, choosing the easier path of acceptance over the exhausting task of justification. As the years passed, her circumstances narrowed. Health issues compounded, and her vibrant party life dimmed. Yet, the youthful image of Margaret, sharp, radiant, adorned in haute couture, remained an indelible cultural reference, embodying the chaos she chose over compliance. Her passing in 2002 signified not just the evisceration of a figure but the conclusion of an era of royal defiance. Margaret's rule-breaking wasn't an act of destruction. It was a rejection of containment, a refusal to be molded solely into a royal ideal rather than embracing her flawed humanity, complete with vulnerabilities and indulgences. In all her defiance, her title of Royal Highness remained, highlighting the cruel irony of her story. The institution that she sought to challenge penned her final chapters. But if there was a lesson in Margaret's life, it was this: the pursuit of love, freedom, and attention is not a flaw. It has simply never found a warm welcome within the House of Windsor, especially for those monarchs who cloak their passions in decorum. The history of royal figures like George I mirrors a persistent truth. One can wield power while secretly longing for love, a reality played out beyond the closed doors of aristocracy. George I, the reluctant King of England. He ruled England with all the warmth of a ledger and the charm of an uninspiring weekday. By many accounts, he was a rather unimpressive figure, rigid and straightforward, with only a limited grip on the English language, more captivated by sausages than by the complexities of British politics. Yet, within the lackluster persona of this foreign monarch lay a personal history so scandalous it could overshadow his bureaucratic legacy. For while George I failed to enrapture the hearts of the British, he certainly left a trail of shattered ones back in Hanover. To delve into the tangled affairs of George I, we must rewind to a time before he donned the English crown. Born in 1660 in Hanover, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, he entered into a cold and calculating marriage with his cousin, Sophia de Rather of Chell, in 1682. Their union was devoid of warmth. George viewed it as a dynastic necessity, while Sophia saw him as a formidable wall. Soon enough, disillusionment turned into resentment, spiraling into a marital disaster worthy of modern reality TV. Sophia was vibrant and full of life, and she refused to quietly accept her royal confinement. Her relationship with the charming Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck, a dashing Swedish nobleman, stirred speculation. Whether they were truly lovers or merely entangled, history leaves us without answers. But George, caught in the balance, yearned for an escape. In 1694, Königsmarck vanished without a trace. Rumours whispered of foul play, stories of a palace murder and a body submerged in lime or hidden beneath the castle floors. The official record offered no explanation, and George remained silent. No charges were ever issued, yet the implication was unmistakable. Some secrets are buried faster than they can be spoken. Then came George's ultimate act of punishment, imprisoning Sophia in a remote castle. This was no simple scandal management. It was a sentence of life. Locked away for over 3 decades, she was stripped of her titles, barred from her children's lives, transforming her into nothing more than a royal spectre. George did not seek a divorce. Acknowledging her would have meant recognizing her existence. Instead, he erased her from his world and moved forward. When he arrived in England in 1714, he emerged as an unexpected monarch, a product of convoluted laws excluding Catholics from the throne. He was 54, German, and met with a mix of confusion and indifference from his new subjects. With a limited command of English and little concern for local culture, he delegated his royal responsibilities to others. However, he did bring from Hanover a notable presence, a mistress, or rather, mistresses. Chief among them was Melusine van der Sullenberg, a tall and striking noblewoman whose influence was as undeniable as her visibility at court. Known as the Duchess of Kendal, she was neither hidden away nor shamed, seamlessly integrating into the royal environment, her importance rivaling that of the king himself. Rumours swirled around her, suggesting her involvement in the political machinations of the court, her quarters serving as a secondary centre for decision-making. Then there was Charlotte Sophia Kilmansegger, the Countess of Darlington, dismissively dubbed the Elephant by a cruel press, also German and another fixture in George's entourage. Allegations regarding her status oscillated between mistress and half-sister, blurring the lines that royal gossip often struggles to define. Indifferent to public opinion, George's reign unfolded with scandal simmering just below the surface. His courtiers scrambled through the complexities of royal politics, knowing that the Queen remained a prisoner in Germany, while the mistresses had their own roles in Kensington. With the kingdom's fate in one hand and love letters in the other, George passed away in 1727 in Germany. He left behind a son filled with resentment, a court eager to move on, and a peculiar legacy, a king who failed to conquer hearts but excelled at eliminating them from his domain. Shortly after his death, Sophia Dorothea, still in confinement, passed away without ever seeing her children again. She was never granted a trial or a chance to defend herself. Her punishment was silent, complete, and efficient, just like George himself. The tale of George I teaches us that power requires no passion, only permanence. Neither England nor its monarch experienced love for one another, yet their system thrived on ignoring this vital truth. However, in all his shrewd calculations and emotional detachment, George could not escape the inevitable reality that desire always prevails, even when locked away or obscured by titles. Centuries before George II navigated betrayals with calculated finesse, another king, not shy to express his fervor, carved his narrative in the annals of medieval legend. That king was Henry II, known for his deep affection for a woman renowned as the Fair Rosalind. In the shadowy, echoing corridors of medieval English royalty, where alliances forged through marriage eclipsed the notion of love, and monarchs often turned to the arms of mistresses as mere distractions from their thrones, one king truly stood apart. Henry II, born in 1133 and crowned in 1154, navigated a turbulent realm with a fervor that bordered on obsession, one that birthed songs and legends shrouded in both passion and intrigue. His domain extended beyond England, encompassing vast regions of France and the contentious territories of Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine, yet he found himself perpetually beleaguered by conflict rather than basking in the glory of rule. Henry's union with Eleanor of Aquitaine was as politically astute as it was tumultuous. 8 children and numerous rebellions emerged from their explosive partnership. Eleanor, a force in her own right, matched Henry in ambition, and ambition eventually turned to opposition. Yet amid marital strife and the complex chessboard of noble politics, it was another woman who captured Henry's heart, Rosamund Clifford, a beauty born of lesser nobility and enchanting in her very essence. Where previous mistresses flitted in and out of favour, Rosamund became a fixation, an elusive beacon of peace against the stormy tides of royal duties. Their affair blossomed in the mid-1160s, possibly escalating when Eleanor was imprisoned due to their son's rebellion. Rosamund offered a respite from political manoeuvring, a sanctuary of gentleness and light. Yet, in the world of the 12th century, such simplicity was quickly complicated by whispers of scandal. Rumours swirled that Henry constructed a secret pleasure palace for Rosamund in Woodstock, complete with a labyrinth designed to shield her from inquisitive eyes, particularly those of Eleanor. The myth unfurled with dramatic flair, suggesting that Eleanor, upon discovering the affair, ventured through the maze, dagger drawn, to confront her rival. The law concluded with a fateful choice for Rosamund: death by dagger or poison. She chose poison, an act of nobility or cowardice, depending on the narrator. Historically, however, such accounts lack substantiation, yet their persistence reveals the impact of their romance, entwined in tragedy and heartache. What remains indisputable is that Rosamund passed away young around 1176, with her cause of death cloaked in mystery. Henry was said to have mourned deeply, entombing her at Godstow Abbey, where her grave attracted pilgrims until the church intervened in 1191, deeming her tomb inappropriate for a harlot. Thus, she was relegated to a final resting place outside the abbey, a figurative exile reflecting the limits of royal sorrow against the backdrop of doctrine. Henry's reign continued amidst turmoil, skirmishes with his sons, conflict with the Church, most notably exemplified in the tragic murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket in 1170, which tarnished his legacy. As he aged, suspicion and disappointment marked his later years. Yet, the poignant truth persists that amidst the tumult of empire and familial betrayals, it was the quiet presence of Rosamund, largely forgotten by history, that soothed his unrest. What does it signify when a king, wielding vast power and bound to a formidable queen, creates a covert world for someone like Rosamund? It reveals a shared humanity, the rich tapestry of desire, longing for solace in the midst of solitude, and how unchecked desire transmutes into fervent legends. Henry's life ended in 1189, his legacy marred by personal strife and abandonment by those he once trusted. While Eleanor outlived him, Rosamund's name rested beyond history's grasp, eternally outside the abbey gates, untouched by redemption. Yet, her existence whispered volumes, not through power or rebellion, but through being profoundly desired. This longing spurred a narrative built around her memory. Henry II wasn't the sole monarch whose passions rocked the established structure. A century later, another king would ascend to the throne, embracing affection that was both contentious and profoundly transformative, granting titles and power to his lovers. In doing so, Edward II would place everything on the line, influencing the course of history itself. Edward II, a monarch whose story is as perplexing as it is intriguing. Born in 1284 and crowned king in 1307, his reign became a chaotic tapestry of contradictions that lasted 20 tumultuous years. Unlike many rulers, Edward found pleasure in pursuits over strategy, seemingly uninterested in the very wars he was expected to lead. Yet, it was his scandalous affections that bewildered his contemporaries. His close bond with Piers Gaveston, a minor Gascon noble who, through the sheer force of Edward's affection, defied the norms of medieval hierarchy. Gaveston's presence sparked political turmoil. Despite his modest origins, he garnered titles and land, earning the biting disdain of chroniclers who describe him as arrogant and too close to the king. His flamboyant style and mocking demeanor only heightened tensions, leading to his exile and, ultimately, his brutal execution by the barons in 1312, a wound that Edward could never heal. Following Gaveston's death, Edward surrounded himself with new controversial figures, notably Hugh Despenser the Younger and his father, both of whom exacerbated unrest within the kingdom. Their close ties to the king intensified hatred towards them, especially from Queen Isabella, Edward's wife, who had her own reasons for discontent after years of sidelining in a male-dominated court. In a stunning power play reminiscent of medieval sieges, Isabella allied with Roger Mortimer in 1326, leading an invasion that overthrew Edward, forced him into abdication in favour of his son Edward III, and orchestrated the execution of the Despensers. What followed was a turbulent imprisonment for Edward, who, by 1327, met an untimely death under mysterious circumstances at Berkeley Castle. The whispers of illness, assassination, and darker speculations cloud his demise, casting a lasting shadow over his legacy. While his reign was riddled with failures, it is Edward's emotional tapestry, his intense, sometimes scandalous relationships, that continues to captivate historians. Unlike a detached ruler, Edward II's affections destabilized the conventions of his time, highlighting the fragile balance between intimacy and authority, a reality so evocative that it resonates through history. Edward's memory, once painfully scrubbed clean by his son, still lingers, embodying the notion that a king can be undone by love and fidelity rather than by combat and animosity. As centuries passed, The echoes of his story influenced those who dared to love openly amidst the shadows of the court, paving the way for figures like Queen Caroline of Brunswick, who famously turned her scandalous affairs into a theatrical spectacle. Edward II remains not just a footnote in history. He is a poignant reminder of the complex interplay between personal desire and the burden of royalty. In the annals of captivating monarchy, Queen Caroline of Brunswick emerges as a remarkable figure, one who could easily claim a front-row seat in a mythical hall of legends, not for her grace, but for her audacious defiance. Born in 1768 in what is now Germany, Caroline embodied a mix of royal heritage and tempestuous spirit. While gifted with intelligence and a fleeting charm, her true essence was a cauldron of sarcasm and a blatant disregard for societal norms. Her family, often exasperated by her unconventionality, set the stage for a union destined for disaster, her marriage to George IV. Their encounter on April 5, 1795, was memorable, but not in a romantic way. George, in dire straits due to his debts, sought a wife who could salvage his reputation. Caroline, a Protestant princess, fit the bill in lineage but fell short in George's eyes. Upon seeing her, he famously demanded a drink, and during their ceremonious wedding just 2 days later, he staggered through it inebriated, later collapsing on the floor that night. For Caroline, her new husband was cold and insufferably pompous, and the marriage yielded one child, Princess Charlotte, but nothing resembling love. What followed was a prolonged public feud that transformed their estrangement into a royal spectacle. Living separately, with George banishing her from court and Caroline hurling insults at him, their lives resembled something more like a Cold War than a marriage. Ultimately, she retreated from royal life, seeking refuge in Italy, where her life took an intriguing turn. Embracing her independence, Caroline surrounded herself with unconventional companions and delighted in social gatherings that defied royal decorum. This newfound freedom, however, caught the attention of the British government, paranoid about her autonomy, prompting them to spy on her. Enter Bartolomeo Pergami, an Italian servant-turned-chamberlain who became her confidant and, according to many accounts, her lover. Their close connection was a scandalous affront to the monarchy, as they traversed Europe together, seemingly thriving in each other's company. In contrast to her neglectful husband, Pergami was attentive and genuine, sparking outrage among the British elite. Yet Caroline, rather than hiding from the rumors, seemingly basked in the intrigue, posing boldly for portraits with Pergami and elevating his status. Amidst this backdrop, tragedy struck with the death of King George III in 1820, lifting George IV to the throne. Determined to deny Caroline her position, he initiated the Pains and Penalties Bill, aiming to strip her of her title by accusing her of infidelity. The ensuing trial was a chaotic mix of political drama and sensational accusations, with sordid details about her relationship with Pergami emerging. Instead of shaming her, public sentiment turned in her favor, as many saw her as a symbol of defiance against royal constraints. Despite the trial's outcome favoring her, the bill was ultimately dropped. Her status remained contentious. When she attempted to attend George IV's coronation in 1821, she faced rejection at the doors of Westminster Abbey, symbolizing her complete exclusion from a monarchy she legally belonged to. Just weeks later, she succumbed to illness at 53, leaving behind a poignant request for her coffin to bear the words, "Here lies Caroline, the injured Queen of England." Caroline of Brunswick was not a paragon of virtue. Indeed, she was a complex and often vexing figure. Yet her stubbornness carved a path, compelling a nation to reconsider the essence of royalty and the price of dignity. Her story illuminates a monarchy fraught with scandal, reflective of a historical tapestry where desire, particularly from women, was tightly controlled. Moreover, while her tale may stand unique, it echoes through time, tracing back to another woman, Mary Boleyn, who made her indelible mark upon the royal stage long before and Boleyn ascended. Mary Boleyn, a name that flutters like a ghostly whisper through the shadows of Tudor history, often lost in the brilliance of her infamous sister, and Mary lived a life overshadowed, yet intrinsically linked to the tides of power in Tudor England. Before and sparked a monumental religious upheaval and met her tragic end, Mary had already etched her presence within the confines of the king's private quarters. Was she a harbinger of doom or simply the first echo of a scandalous legacy? Born around 1499 into the cunning Boleyn family, Mary was destined for the intricate dance of court life. Her family grasped the unspoken rules, where charm served as currency, beauty wielded as a weapon, and access to the king promised influence. She possessed all these traits but lacked the sharp, calculating edge of her sister. Though she participated eagerly in courtly affairs, she was not a schemer. The details of her early life remain obscured, typical for women of her time. We do know that as a teenager, she was sent to the French court, serving as a maid of honor to marry Henry VIII's sister. This experience immersed her in the subtlety of courtly seduction, rumored to have made her the mistress of King Francis I, who famously called her "my English maid," a title that, whether earned or exaggerated, clung to her reputation. Upon her return to England, Mary, now with a softened image, found herself in the court of Catherine of Aragon and soon crossed paths with Henry VIII himself. Their affair likely ignited in the early 1520s, shortly after her marriage to William Carey, a match considered respectable, made even more so by the king's interest in her. The relationship yielded no love letters or heartfelt accounts, only whispers of two children, Catherine and Henry, whose true paternity remains a captivating mystery. While Henry failed to publicly acknowledge them, the undeniable speculation lingers, pointing to truths often buried in silence. As swiftly as royal favor is bestowed, it can vanish, and by the mid-1520s, Mary had slipped from the king's favor as he turned his attentions to the ambitious and, with two children, her connection to the throne grew more tenuous. Despite witnessing her sister's meticulous rise, calculated and deliberate, Mary remained on the periphery. Their relationship had always been strained, and Anne, now ensconced in a whirlwind of political and religious fervor, needed no reminders of her sister's past entanglements with the king. In 1534, Mary ignited another scandal of her own making, marrying beneath her status to William Stafford, a soldier without wealth or ambition. In doing so, she invited disgrace and was promptly exiled from court, abandoned by her sister, who had ascended to the throne. In a rare act of love over strategy, Mary faced banishment, but within this exile, she discovered a rare tranquility. Embracing her new life with Stafford in the countryside, she evaded the constant turmoil of royal life, moving far from the influence of the crown. Though she never reclaimed her former status and faded from prominence, Mary's fate diverged ultimately from that of her family. While her sister Anne was executed in 1536 and their brother George followed soon after, Mary's life came to a quiet close in 1543, at around 44 years old, leaving no grand funerals or monuments behind, a mere whisper in history, yet one that once shaped the kingdom's trajectory. Her legacy is, oddly, both a footnote and a precursor. The initial Boleyn to tempt a king, she also learned of the transient nature of favor. She was no manipulator, nor was she a saint. Rather, she was an ordinary woman caught in the grand designs of others, striving for a life of her own. And in the wake of her story, there emerged a bold descendant, Prince George of Wales, a kindred spirit in ambition, but born generations later amidst the intrigues of the 20th century. This George, cloaked in rumor rather than royal duty, chased secrets through the elegant chaos of champagne-soaked soirees, forever echoing the ambiguities of his family's past. In the realm of British royalty, one name whispers through the ages: Prince George, Duke of Kent's elder brother. Born in 1902 to King George V and Queen Mary, he quietly navigated a world where public emotion was anathema and privacy was fiercely guarded. Unlike his namesake, the Duke of Kent, who met a tragic end in a plane crash, this Prince George danced through the shadows of high society, a royal figure devoid of formal purpose yet pulsating with allure long before tabloid cameras prowled the streets. A man of intrigue, he emerged as one of the most talked-about characters in early 20th century British social circles, not through royal decree, but by the company he kept. Charismatic, intelligent, and acutely aware of the constraints placed upon him, George revelled in a peculiar liberty granted to second sons. The throne would never be his burden. While his brother Edward crafted a tale of royal romance, George sought after connections, navigating the refined and clandestine landscapes of London's elite parties, from gala dinners to intimate night escapes with actresses and socialites. He never committed to matrimony or settled down, ensuring that the public could never fully characterize him, a strategic evasion in a monarchy unwilling to embrace emotional nuance. With rumors swirling, whispers of affairs with glamorous actresses and ties to unconventional European aristocrats, George, unlike Edward, remained unfazed by the gossip. His relationships orbited around him rather than the reverse. He enjoyed a taste for life, romantic and artistic, without allowing it to consume him. Equipped with sharp intellect and genuine curiosity for culture, George hosted salons and supported the arts, acting as a subtle ambassador for a more engaged monarchy. He eluded strict royal expectations, a figure too enigmatic to utilize, yet too prominent to disregard. It's all too easy to envision a historical narrative where George emerges as a pioneer of a modern monarchy, but his destiny collapsed under the weighty decisions surrounding him. Edward's abdication in 1936 shifted the monarchy towards solemnity as war loomed. Accepting the shadows, George withdrew, shunning public scrutiny, living his final years cloaked in a soft luxury, surrounded by those who valued discretion. He passed away in 1972, his presence diminishing in public memory, leaving behind only polite acknowledgments from acquaintances of yore. Yet, his legacy seeps like a subtle watermark through royal history, a man who navigated the delicate balance between visibility and exposure. A figure residing on the periphery of the monarchy, he embraced mystery as a shield against the stifling expectations of royalty. Prince George did not seek drama, he transcended it. Unlike others who plunged into chaos, he remained, beautifully unscathed, at the very edge of royal life. Some, however, could not avoid igniting their fires, a fate shared by passionate souls like Lady Caroline Lamb, who navigated the tempest of scandal, declaring Lord Byron mad, bad, and dangerous to know, a title she claimed herself. 16. Lady Caroline Lamb. Lady Caroline Lamb, though never a royal in title, danced perilously close to the heart of the monarchy's tempestuous world in the early 19th century. Born in 1785 to the distinguished Ponsonby family, she was the niece of the Duke of Devonshire and the granddaughter of a prime minister. Caroline was not just a woman of her time. She was a force that challenged the very rules of societal conduct. With a beauty that defied norms and a quick wit that could slice through any pretension, she gained a reputation for both brilliance and instability. In 1805, she married William Lamb, destined to become Lord Melbourne, but their union was fraught from the beginning. While William embodied steadiness, Caroline oscillated predictably between fervent passion and chilling detachment. The arrival of their son, Augustus, who needed special care, added strain to their already mismatched relationship. Yet, there was a moment when Caroline played the role of the dutiful political wife, engaging with London's elite. The pivotal moment arrived in 1812, altering the trajectory of her life, she crossed paths with the sensational poet Lord Byron. Their fleeting affair ignited scandal, throwing the fabric of polite society into disarray. Caroline, unyielding and bold, portrayed Byron as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, penetrating the depths of public and private turmoil with her candid expressions. These episodes became fodder for her art. Amidst the chaos followed an outpouring of creativity. Caroline wrote passionately, producing poetry and novels, including Glenarvan Dash, which scandalized the elite by laying bare her experiences in a way that was both revealing and provocative. This act of exposure led to her ostracization, her marriage collapsing under societal scrutiny. As her physical and emotional health waned, she continued to defy societal norms, refusing to fade quietly from a scene. She curated her own narrative with theatrical flair, often dressing as male literary figures to reclaim her agency and visibility. Her connection to royalty was constant, yet fleeting, as she traversed the fringes without full acceptance due to her refusal to conform to expectations. By 1828, Caroline was gone, having lived a life woven with both brilliance and tragedy. William Lamb, behind closed doors, acknowledged her unending brilliance and spirit. Over the years, views on Caroline have evolved. She emerged as a flawed yet potent feminist icon. Her story, one of yearning and defiance, carved a space for voices that challenged silence and compliance. Following her seismic presence, Princess Louise, Duchess of Argyll, emerged as another figure who, despite privilege, reshaped expectations quietly, blending artistry with the muted rebellion inherent in her life as a royal. Princess Louise, Duchess of Argyll, was never what the royal establishment envisioned. Born in 1848 as Queen Victoria and Prince Albert's sixth child, she belonged to an empire that scrutinized her lineage intensely. While her siblings adhered strictly to the expectations of Victorian duty, demure, obedient, and tucked into the royal machinery, Louise broke the mold, a free spirit, an artist, and, some claimed, a radical. Tales surrounded her. She painted under a pseudonym, sculpted in secret, and stirred intrigue by loving both men and women. Her spirited demeanor was never a mere act of rebellion. Rather, it erupted from a vibrant personality eager to express itself. With a sharp wit and an even sharper intellect, her upbringing under the strict supervision of the Duchess of Kent and various governors did little to stifle her. Louise was an avid reader, constantly questioning the constraints of royal existence. Unlike her sisters, who resigned themselves to ceremonial marriages and official functions, she yearned for autonomy and creative expression, envisioning a space that was truly her own. Defying expectations, she pursued art seriously, enrolling in the National Art Training School and later the Royal College of Art, becoming one of the rare women of her time to engage with art in an era dominated by men. Her work received acclaim, and while some critics suggested her title offered her protection from harsher critique, it was undeniable that her pieces carried emotional depth. Louise vividly captured Queen Victoria's hands, created memorials, and even dabbled in architecture. Some of her works are still visible today, bearing her signature, while others reside in anonymity, hinting that she might have believed her talent would only garner true recognition unshackled from royal ties. Her personal life became a tapestry woven with speculation. For someone born into the most examined family in the empire, she created an aura of enigmatic secrecy. Whispers circulated about her close friendships with women, details often lacking public confirmation, yet tabulated discreetly by biographers. In this layered Victorian vernacular, her profound connections with female companions stirred enough gossip to make heads turn. Moreover, her relationships with men often bordered on scandalous, including persistent rumors involving her tutor, the sculptor Joseph Edgar Boehm, whose sudden death prompted silent conversations and connections to Louise that the palace chose to ignore. In a bid to establish normalcy or perhaps to manage her independence, Louise married John Campbell, the Marquis of Lorne, in 1871. On paper, the match was shrewd, noble, and intellectually compatible. However, the reality felt peculiar from the outset, with no children and long separations. Their correspondence revealed affection, albeit devoid of passionate romance. Historians describe the marriage as companionable, royal code for a partnership marked by polite professionalism rather than warmth. Yet, Louise embraced her role as Duchess of Argyll pragmatically, championing women's education and engaging in the arts. While residing in Canada, she struggled with the formalities imposed by viceregal life but managed to leave a lasting impression with her grace and defiance against being merely a political figurehead. She hiked, painted, and once wandered into the woods for hours, absorbed in her art while leaving her staff in a state of concern. As her later years unfolded back in Britain, they remained quiet yet autonomous. Louise continued to sculpt, welcomed artists and thinkers into her life, and carefully balanced her distance from royal expectations. With Queen Victoria's death in 1901, the monarchy advanced, though not quickly enough to keep pace with Louise, who had always had a modern spirit. She passed away in 1939 at the venerable age of 91, having outlived nearly all her siblings and contemporaries. In a rare choice for royalty, she opted for cremation and requested a simple interment. While Louise's life did not result in notable scandals, it gleamed with an understated defiance. Her defiance didn't dominate Buckingham Palace. Rather, she etched her identity into its very fabric. She lived her rebellion through art, friendships, and secret exchanges. Ultimately, Louise remained an enigma, a story half told and alluringly complex. For while Victorian royals were meant to be pristine figures behind glass, Princess Louise shattered expectations, took up her artistic tools, and carved a narrative distinctly her own. In parallel, her legacy contrasts strikingly with the next generation of royals, who would find themselves forged by the fires of war and youth, like Henry V, a king before truly becoming a man, enthralled by a life full of vigor, spiraling into the legend he would become. Long before he became the legendary figure known as the hero of Aegina, and well before Shakespeare transformed him into the formidable, introspective warrior poet we know today, Henry V existed in an entirely different guise. He was bold, impulsive, and vibrantly alive. In his youth, when he was called Prince Hal, he roamed late medieval England, not as a poised heir to the throne, but as a lively spectre of rebellion. He revelled in the pleasures of drinking, gambling, and clandestine adventures, often mingling in the shadows, where the courtiers of his father preferred to tread lightly. Born around 1386 or 1387, he was the firstborn of Henry Bolingbroke, who would rise to become Henry IV and Mary de Bohun. Expectations dictated a careful upbringing, far removed from the chaos of life, with every instruction aimed at grooming him for governance. Yet, the political turmoil surrounding his childhood was anything but calm. His father's audacious usurpation of the throne from Richard II in 1399 thrust young Hal into a world already fraught with tension and mistrust. As a teenager thrust into visibility, Hal was more drawn to personal adventures than to matters of state. His teenage years unfolded in a tapestry of vivid escapades, rampant tavern outings, brush-ups with commoners, and thrilling brawls painted the picture of a young man reveling in the vibrant chaos of life. Chronicles recount these exploits with a dramatic flair, weaving together elements of truth and exaggeration. Tales of him spending time in London's less admirable quarters, indulging in vices, and engaging in public scuffles abound, with whispers of a time when he challenged a judge, an incident that earned his father's commendation for judicial integrity. It proves a complex task to untangle the truth from the myth of Hal's youth, yet one notable depiction persists, that of the wayward prince who ultimately finds redemption. Shakespeare, a master of myth, captured this transformation, chronicling Hal's flamboyant youth and subsequent metamorphosis into a responsible leader, a narrative grounded in some undeniable truths about his character. For Hal, his youthful pleasures were more than mere indulgence, they served a strategic purpose. He was acutely aware of the gaze upon him, each laugh shared, every whispered romance, and even his late-night escapades contributed to a carefully constructed image that masked his true royal heritage. By presenting himself as reckless, he diminished expectations, allowing him the freedom to exceed them later on. Yet, before redemption came noteworthy indulgences. He surrounded himself with friends on the fringes of propriety, poets, squires, entertainers, and, as whispers suggest, a revolving door of lovers, unrecorded and unacknowledged. Rumors circulated of a mistress in nearly every town he visited, and even possible illegitimate children. However, as a prince, discretion was paramount. Acknowledgement would only jeopardize his reputation. Amid his revelries and gatherings, Hull also found himself drawn into military campaigns, perhaps as a way to channel his chaotic energy into purpose. He faced battles in Wales against Owain Glendower and bore the scars of conflict at Shrewsbury in 1403, where he received a life-threatening wound to the face, a reminder of the frailty of life despite any youthful bravado. Many believe that this pivotal battle marked the beginning of his transformation. As his father's health waned, Hal embraced more responsibilities, gradually shedding his reckless persona for that of a statesman. By the time Henry IV passed away in 1413, Hal had fully transitioned into Henry V. With this new identity came the legend. The wayward prince, now a king, initiated a campaign in France culminating in the renowned Battle of Aegina in 1415, a historic English triumph celebrated for its drama and iconic portrayal of heroic leadership. Yet, the tale of the scandalous youth faded from the overarching narrative. In reality, it did not vanish, it adapted. The essence of the rogue who once captivated taverns now fueled his command over soldiers, who would steadfastly follow him through treacherous terrains of battle. Henry, who met an untimely demise at 35 in 1422, bequeathed a rich legacy of valor and stirring rhetoric, as well as the shadow of a past spent testing the bounds of royal expectations. While Henry's mythology was painstakingly carved into the annals of history, another king's legacy, steeped in both conflict and affection, remained unsettled. Richard I, known as the Lionheart, was every bit the warrior but cloaked in nature beneath his armor that has ignited speculation for centuries, revealing the complexities of the royal stories that shaped England's past. Richard I, known as the Lionheart, looms large in the annals of English history, but perhaps not for the reasons one might think. Born in Oxford in 1157, Richard spent little time in the kingdom he governed, preferring the language of French and the landscapes of Aquitaine. Throughout his 10-year reign, he was physically present in England for a mere fraction of that time. A warrior, a crusader, and a king, Richard's legacy isn't defined by effective rulership. Indeed, he wasn't a great monarch, but rather by the captivating myths surrounding his persona. As the third son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, Richard was imbued with a fierce ambition and a flair for the dramatic, traits inherited from his mother. By his teenage years, he was leading troops against his father, and by the time he claimed the throne in 1189, he had become an admired military leader, known for his courage but largely indifferent to political negotiations. Following his coronation, he proceeded on the Third Crusade, prompted not only by faith but also by a desire for glory, claiming Jerusalem as a warrior king's prize. His military endeavors ended in stalemate against Saladin, and although his reputation soared, questions about his royal life lingered, particularly concerning his relationship with his queen. Married to Berengaria of Navarre during the Crusade, their union appeared more transactional than romantic. She remained largely absent in England, with scant evidence of their interactions or affection. While royal marriages often prioritized alliances, Richard's lack of recorded female affection opened the door for speculation. Chroniclers of the era noted his bond with Philip II of France, describing their close camaraderie as unusually intimate, heightening curiosity about the nature of their relationship. Despite the whispers and the diverse interpretations of history, Richard appeared unfazed by traditional notions of family life. Focused on conquest and creativity, he left no heirs or acknowledged mistresses, carving a legacy of valor and heroism on the battlefield instead. He returned to England a changed man after enduring captivity, ultimately dying from wounds sustained in battle. His remains were buried in multiple locations, including his heart in Rouen and his body alongside his parents, illustrating a life divided. Richard I's enigma lies in his personal life, a puzzle that continues to intrigue historians. Was he a solitary warrior, a closeted lover, or simply a king too engrossed in warfare to embrace intimacy? The silence surrounding his affections speaks volumes. He ruled through might rather than lineage, leaving a legacy that is both grand and mysterious. And in a world of changing values, he stands as a captivating precursor to modern royalty, such as Prince Harry, whose own tumultuous journey through scandal would equally keep the public's attention, albeit in a decidedly different age defined by media and intrigue. Long before he embraced the roles of husband, father, and global figure embroiled in royal upheaval, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, was simply seen as a problem. With his trademark ginger hair and infectious grin, he was a paradox that generated headlines from the moment he was born into the very heart of an unyielding institution. Predestined as the spare, a term in Windsor parlance implying all the scrutiny with none of the certainty, Harry quickly learned he was the counterpoint to his older brother, William, the heralded heir and future king. This distinction set the stage for a life marked by chaos and defiance. Arriving in the world in 1984 to Prince Charles and Princess Diana, Harry never quite slipped from the public gaze. His charm was often overshadowed by rebellion, posing a stark contrast to the polished image held by the royal family. He was the progeny of a media legend in an era when the monarchy itself strained under scrutiny. By his teenage years, he was already a staple in tabloids, his youthful indiscretions making headlines and every friendship explored for potential scandal. While William embodied a model of dignified restraint, Harry thrived in the tumult. He seemed to invite mischief, from late-night escapades to questionable costume choices, marking his rebellion not as mere indulgence but as a complex struggle with identity. His antics were underscored by a profound tragedy, the early loss of his mother, Princess Diana, when he was just 12. Her 1997 death not only disrupted the royal image but shattered Harry's internal compass. Mourning publicly, he walked silently behind her coffin through London, emotionally suppressed, a young boy with profound grief cloaked in the garb of duty. As he journeyed through his 20s, his restlessness manifested in both hedonistic revelry and earnest service, ultimately leading to a transformative military career. At Sandhurst, he became part of the British Army, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he gained clarity and purpose far removed from royal expectations. Harry found a structured identity among comrades who viewed him simply as an officer. This newfound perspective ignited a passion that culminated in his founding of the Invictus Games, a global sporting event honoring wounded veterans. It appeared that Harry was finally reconciling his tumultuous past with a hopeful future. Then, a new chapter unfolded. His romance with American actress Meghan Markle sparked a firestorm of media attention, marking a tumultuous era for the royal family. Their relationship unfolded with breathtaking speed and cast a long shadow of skepticism from the British tabloids, eager to exploit Meghan's diverse background and outsider status. As the media's hostility reached fever pitch, Harry, embittered by their perceived role in his mother's demise, took a stand. Not content to simply marry Meghan, he set about dismantling the very expectations laid upon him. In 2020, the couple distanced themselves from the royal fold, finding refuge in North America. Their interview with Oprah Winfrey shattered royal decorum, resonating worldwide. It unveiled harrowing discussions of mental health, emotional isolation, and the relentless pressure of royal life. Harry articulated feelings of entrapment, exposing a deeper critique of the monarchy's unyielding framework. Accusations of hypocrisy emerged from critics, who argued he was abandoning responsibility for a sun-soaked lifestyle in California, whereas supporters hailed his actions as a profound act of self-preservation. At the heart of it all, Harry seemed to desire the impossible, to embody both royal stature and personal freedom, to be a part of a family without the burden of traditional expectations. In shedding the skin of a reluctant second son, Prince Harry emerged transformed, a royal rewriting his narrative not out of disdain for the monarchy, but from a profound understanding of its demands. His life, laden with scandal, shows an intense struggle for self-definition amid the suffocating constraints of his birthright. While he may not be the first royal to challenge the status quo, he is certainly the first to wield the tools of modern media in doing so. Ultimately, his story invites a reflection on an ancient dilemma that plagues the British monarchy eternally. What befalls those human, flawed individuals who must navigate the chasm between their true selves and the expectations thrust upon them? The answer continues to reverberate with tales of scandal and complexity that span centuries.